So how does it happen? How does a modern, cultured nation just spiral into becoming a machine of unimaginable horror? It's a question that, honestly, haunts history. And to even begin to understand it, we have to go back. We need to trace the steps, one by one, that led to the rise of Nazism.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's the spring of 1945. An 11-year-old German boy, his name is Helmut, he overhears his father, a respected doctor, say something absolutely bone-chilling to his mother. They were talking about whether they should end the entire family's life or if only he should die.
Think about that for a second. Why would a father, a doctor, even consider that? The very next day, Helmut's father took him to a park, they sang songs together, and then he went into his office and shot himself. To really get a grip on the kind of terror that would drive a man to do something like that, we have to understand the world that created him, the regime he was a part of.
All right, so where do we start? Well, our story doesn't actually begin with Hitler. No, it begins with the end of another war entirely, World War I. You see, Germany was defeated, the emperor had bailed, and this new democratic government popped up in the city of Weimar. And, you guessed it, they called it the Weimar Republic.
So, this brand new republic's very first job? Signing a peace treaty. But here's the thing, the Treaty of Versailles, it wasn't really about peace. For so many Germans, it felt like pure humiliation. The victorious allies, Britain, France, the US, they basically forced Germany to give up huge chunks of its territory.
And the scale of these losses, it was just staggering. It wasn't just land. We're talking 75% of its iron and over a quarter of its coal. Think about that. That's the very engine of an industrial country just gone. It was designed to be an economic cripple.
But maybe even worse than the economic hit was the moral one. There was something called the War Guilt Clause. It forced Germany to take all the blame for the war, 100% of it. And on top of that, they had to pay reparations, a sum of £6 billion. For the average German, this was just a national disgrace.
So here's the really crucial part. A lot of Germans didn't blame the old empire or the generals for this humiliation. Nope, they pointed the finger right at their new democratic government. The people who supported the Weimar Republic, the socialists, the Catholics, the Democrats, they got branded as the November criminals for signing that treaty. So right from the get-go, democracy in Germany was born with this stain of betrayal that it could just never wash off.
Okay, so you have this fragile republic already born from humiliation, and now it's about to get hit by not one, but two devastating economic storms. And these crises, well, they would convince millions that democracy had completely failed them.
The first storm slams into Germany in 1923. To pay off those massive war debts, the government just starts printing money. And I mean a lot of money. This triggers an absolute economic catastrophe, hyperinflation.
So, what is hyperinflation? It's basically when money loses all its meaning. The value of the German mark just completely collapsed, and with it, the life savings of the entire middle class. Poof, gone.
And to put this into perspective for you, by the end of 1923, one single US dollar was worth trillions of German marks. It got completely absurd. You hear the stories, and they're true. People were literally taking wheelbarrows full of cash to the store just to buy a loaf of bread. Imagine that.
Now, with some help from American loans, Germany actually managed to stabilize things for a few years. But that stability, it was totally built on sand. Because when the Wall Street stock market crashed in 1929, the Great Depression, those American loans just dried up overnight. And that plunged Germany into its second and even deeper crisis.
Industrial production just fell off a cliff, down by 40%. And by 1932, a staggering 6 million Germans were out of work. People were standing on street corners with signs around their necks that just said, willing to do any work. The entire society was just gripped by fear and absolute total desperation.
And it's into this vortex of economic despair and political anger that Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party step onto the stage. They offered a desperate people exactly what they were craving most: simple answers and the promise of a savior.
Hitler's message was just so powerful because it was perfectly tailored to people's pain. He promised to build a strong nation. He promised to tear up that humiliating Treaty of Versailles. He promised to restore Germany's dignity. And, maybe most important of all, he promised jobs and bread for everyone. He promised a secure future for the youth. And he promised to weed out all the so-called foreign influences and conspiracies that he claimed were ruining the country.
And you have to understand, Hitler was a mesmerizing speaker. He really understood the power of spectacle.
Nazism wasn't just a political party, it was a performance. These massive rallies you see, with the swastika banners, the salutes, the thunderous applause, all of it was designed to project strength and create this powerful sense of belonging in a society that felt completely broken and divided.
You know, the numbers really tell the whole story. Before the Great Depression hit, the Nazis were basically a fringe party. They were getting just 2.6% of the vote. But then, just 3 years later, right in the depths of the crisis, they became the largest party in Germany, with 37% of the vote. The link between that desperation and their rise, it's just undeniable.
So on January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany. And this is key. He gained power legally, but he had absolutely no intention of playing by the rules. The destruction of German democracy would be swift and ruthless.
I mean, check out how fast this happened. Within a single month, a mysterious fire guts the parliament building, the Reichstag. Hitler immediately blames his political enemies, the communists, and uses it as the perfect excuse to issue the fire decree. And just like that, basic civil rights like freedom of speech and press are suspended. Then, in March, comes the final blow. It was called the Enabling Act. And this law effectively made Hitler a dictator. It gave him the power to rule by decree, which means he could make laws without Parliament's approval at all. Within weeks, all other political parties and trade unions were banned, and just like that, the police state was born.
So, you see, that promise to restore order, it turned into a system of total control and absolute terror. A whole special security apparatus, the Gestapo, the SS, was created. And this brings us right back to the fear in Helmut's father's voice. The regime he served unleashed a genocide, systematically murdering millions of people it deemed undesirable.
So, what's the lesson here? What can we possibly learn from this incredibly dark chapter of history?
The fall of the Weimar Republic and the rise of Nazism. Yeah, it's a story of political failure and economic crisis, of course it is. But it's also the story of millions of individual choices. It's about fears being exploited and about ordinary people who became complicit in some of the most extraordinary evil imaginable. It's the story of Helmut and his father.
Ultimately, this whole history leaves us with a really chilling and timeless question. It forces us to ask ourselves, when societies face a major crisis, when people lose hope and are desperate for a savior, just how fragile are the democratic institutions that we so often take for granted?